Hello everyone and welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm delighted to say that we have Fran Disken and Deirdre Cijffers joining us to talk about joining up your blended learning. I'm really pleased to have Deirdre returning to give another webinar for us. Deirdre, as I'm sure you'll know, is a teacher trainer who's been involved in teaching and teacher development for the last 14 years and has taught English in 7 countries over the course of her career. Fran is commissioning editor for Unlock at Cambridge University Press. She has 17 years of ELT teaching and editorial experience, 10 of which were as a teacher in Europe, Africa and the Indian subcontinent, and she is Delta qualified. So we'll kick off with Deirdre.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. I'm very excited to be here with my colleague, Fran, who knows Cambridge Discovery Unlock inside out, and I know one or two things about working with students online. So hopefully, by our powers combined, you will go home with a few good teaching tips and ideas to take back to your classes tomorrow. So, what are we looking at today? Well, essentially, we're talking about joining up. So, what we've got at the moment, and potentially this might be your situation as well, is that often we work in class with our students, as we always have, and we work really well with them. And you maybe give them some homework. Maybe it's on paper, maybe it's online, and then we go on to class 2, and that's the real thread of our experience with them, and that's the line of experience that they go through with us as well. So really the core of what they do is purely on the blue line between class 1 and class 2. And when we ask them to do online work, it's kind of, it's maybe a bit separate. It's something else that they're going to do. It's not necessarily something we feel we need to be very involved in. So they go and they do it independently, and often the information that we get about online workbooks is that it's something independent. Go let your students be free and creative and work online, which is all very well, but we're still talking about education, so we don't want them to be too free. We need them to achieve the things that we want them to achieve as well by the end of the semester. So what we're talking about today is bringing that orange box of online work into the line, the main part of the experience that the students are going to have with us, and joining those 3 things up together. So what we'll look at is how we get from the first class into the online experience without the students feeling like it's something completely separate, and bringing that back into the second class again, while the students feel like you've accompanied them along the way and made it part of a seamless blended experience rather than 2 separate things. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to look at a load of different things that all, when we mix them together, make one very strong learning experience for the students. So we'll look at classroom and online activities. We'll look at setting homework and how you go about that. We'll look at consolidation post-class and preparation for next classes. And we'll look at motivation, which is always a big issue when we're getting our students to do anything online. And we'll look at how data can input into all of the above and what you need to do with the data that you've got. So we're not necessarily going to follow that exact structure. We will take you through that same image that you'll see a few times today of the experience in class, online, and then back to class. So we're basically going to work through an actual example of how you could use this product in class time and online. And through that, we will be able to make generalizations about all those things in the list. So today's webinar, we're focusing on Cambridge Discovery Unlock, which is an academic light, if you like. So it's a lower level reading and writing, speaking and listening course. And if your students are too low for IELTS, you could potentially use this with them to get them started on the right path, if you like. So if you're not using Cambridge Discovery Unlock, a lot of the generalizations that we make about using these types of resources will still be valid if you're using another online workbook. But all the examples come specifically from this particular title. So if you noticed, there was a pre-webinar task on the screen at the beginning. I don't know if anybody had a chance to look at that, but I'm going to hand over to Fran to talk about that in a bit more detail. Oh, I missed one. So before you do that, could you just type in the chat box, are you using Cambridge Discovery Unlock? And if not, are you using a workbook? Okay. All right. Well, let's hand over to Fran.
Okay, great. So as far as I can see from that, it looks like most of you aren't using Unlock, which is useful for me because I can now give you a picture of the content as I go through my next few slides. So if we just take a look at that pre-session task, you'll notice that it's based around reading skills. So this is really setting the scene for the webinar, because what we'll be doing is taking an example of a reading lesson and a follow-up lesson from Unlock Reading and Writing Skills Level 2, and we'll show you how you can use that and make the most of the online content around those sections. So this is A2 level content. Okay, I'll quickly check through those answers. I won't actually ask you to feed in. I think I'm expecting you've probably all done quite well on this task, so I won't be checking that specifically. Let's just have a look. So this first one here of matching words to definitions. I'm sure you'll all have got that. That's understanding key vocabulary. The next one, matching titles to paragraphs. And that's reading from main ideas. The next one is knowledge about the Sahara. Using your knowledge. And the final one is, so this one about looking what type, where you might find the article, recognizing text type. I think that's them all. Oh, sorry, no, one final one. Matching sentence halves, and that's reading for detail. Okay, so we've got these 5 skills here, and I will now ask you to do a little task yourselves. Could I ask you to reorder these into a sensible lesson flow? So if you could just, using the numbers, just type in how you would see these as being, what order you would do these skills in a logical reading lesson. I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay, we've got quite a few answers there, so we'll just run through how these skills appear in Unit 6 of Unlock Reading and Writing Skills Level 2. So as you'll see from the various different answers, there is no specific right answer to how you might organise these skills, but we're just going to look at how we organise them in this one particular unit. So we start off with using your knowledge. I'll talk about in detail why we chose this order for the specific lesson rather than talking about this in abstract. So we'll move on to that in the next slide. Next one, understanding key vocabulary. The next one, reading for main ideas, reading for detail, and then recognising text type. I'm trying very quickly to look at all your answers, but it's I'm getting lots of numbers before my eyes. But I think one of the things that I did expect there to be differences in where recognising text type might come in. Often this is something that will be done at the start of a lesson to help students to place that particular piece in context and help them to understand what they're reading. In the particular lesson that we're going to look at, we actually do that at the end, partially because one of the reasons is that we've extracted some of the titles as one of the tasks, and so without the titles, without the subtitles, it's very difficult for students to place where that text is from. And also it's about training them to recognise the text type. So in an ordinary situation, we'd want them to think about the text type right at the start, but here we're actually training them in how to recognise the text type. Okay, so we'll look now at that particular lesson in the context of the book. Okay. Okay, so here you can see the using your knowledge section. It's absolutely vital that students connect to text with their own knowledge before they start, so they can place it within their own understanding. It's very rare that we choose to read something without having some kind of idea about what it's about, and so we need to kind of transfer that to the classroom. And that's what we're doing here. If you wanted an alternative for this, you might just want to show a picture of the Sahara and see what kind of information the students can come up with related to that. This is also followed up, as you'll see on the next page, by question 2 here. Read the article on page 112 and check your answers. So that initial task becomes a bit of a gist reading task. So once they've answered the questions, they then try and find out what the answers to those are in the article itself. And of course, with it being a gist reading text, that needs to be timed and that students should do it quickly. They're just trying to find out those first 2 points. Where's the Sahara? What's the weather like? If they didn't know it from their own knowledge. As you'll see in the next part, we've got understanding key vocabulary. This is important because there are certain keywords in the text that the students have to know to be able to understand the text. In Unlock, what happens is if those keywords that form key understanding of the text are above level, they will be pre-taught. And so it's important that if you decide to do a different activity here, that you keep focusing on those key pieces of vocabulary, just to ensure that students can then follow the text. And you'll see there that these 2 activities form part of the preparing to read section in the reading text. There are 3 key sections for each Unlock reading. Preparing to read is the first one. Students will always see that for each reading text that they work on, but what will differ is the skills, and you can see the skills here marked in the margins. So we've got using your knowledge and understanding key vocabulary. Okay, and here we've got the actual reading text itself. So this one is about how to stay alive in the Sahara Desert, and this is very typical of Unlock reading texts, which are high interest and satisfy some kind of curiosity amongst students, but at the same time they start to introduce relevant academic language and discourse. You can see here that we've got the second two sections which always appear in Unlock readings, the while reading section and the reading between the lines sections. And within these, you've got those tasks, those skills that were practiced, that you've seen in the pre-course task. So we've got the reading for main ideas, reading for detail, and recognising text type. And then here we've got the discussion question at the end, the discussion section here at the end, where students have to choose 3 of the most important things that they would need to have in the desert. Now this can be a simple pair work activity, just to bring out the interest that things that the students have learned from the text. But equally, if you wanted to take it further, you could turn it into a presentation task for students where they need to explain the reasons behind their choices. Okay, and then you'll notice in the margin there, oops, sorry, I've gone one page. Just take you back. You'll notice there in the margin that Unlock Online symbol. I'm going to hand you over to Deirdre again here, and she's going to explain what that means.
Thanks, Fran. One of the nice features of Unlock is that it has this symbol in the side, and you know, might well go unnoticed if you're focusing mostly on the classroom activities, which is perfectly understandable. But since we have an online workbook that matches what goes on in the book, then it's really helpful to have that to tell you when the work that you've just done is going to be backed up and consolidated online. So every time you see this, it means that there is something that you can do that specifically relates to what you've just done to help the students through. So if we have a look at what's in the Cambridge LMS, and I understand lots of people are not using this, but if you've used another Cambridge University Press title that has some online components, you might recognize this page. So this is the content page of the title, and we have all the units are there on the left, and each of the units extends, each of the items extends into the sections that are covered. So we've got reading skills, language development, writing skills, writing task, and game. So there, within each of these sections, there are a number of activities that the students can do. So just as a quick test to see if you remember what Fran said was the first activity type that you do in Unlock, what was that? What was the first that you do in a typical reading lesson? What was the first activity type? Can you type in the chat box now? You have 5 seconds. Nobody's typing. Okay, so clearly this was a tough question. So the first one is, well done, Radha. It is using your knowledge. Very good. So as you see in the online section, we've got using existing knowledge to predict content. Okay, so we're following the same logical structure. What came after using your knowledge? Vocabulary, lovely. Okay, so we have we have again using knowledge. Okay, but it is the vocabulary part. Something strange is happening with the slides. Then in the third bit, I'm going to skip through this quickly. Reading for main ideas, as Fran explained earlier, and the last part, reading for detail. So we have 4 activities. Well done, Jessica. We have 4 activities that basically mirror the 4 stages that you do in class with your students. So these are, if you want, you can go online and you can see these yourselves. But the idea is that when you go online, the whole experience is mimicked. It's not that they go on, they do some stuff in class about reading and then they go online and they do grammar exercises. The online workbook mirrors the skills that you're trying to teach them in the classroom. So this is all very well and good. We've got 4 activities. They're online. Students can do them when they want, preferably before your next class. How are you going to ask them to do that? So imagine you've just finished your lesson, you've gone through all the reading stuff, the students have done really well, and you want them to go home and consolidate these skills. So do you ask them this? Go online and do Unit 6 exercises 1 to 4. Now, I have asked students to do this in the past, and can you imagine what their response might be? Would they go, brilliant, this is my favorite, I love exercises 1 to 4, I'm going to go home and do that right now? Or will they say, I suppose it's useful, so I guess I'll do it, but probably not until right before class? Or will you get, oh, whatever? Which of these 3 responses are most likely to this instruction? Okay, so as expected, we've got 2s and 3s, and Matthias, you have some very dedicated students, good stuff. So essentially, it's not a very exciting thing to be asked to do, exercises 1 to 4. Okay, so we need to work on that a little bit better. So we have another option. What we're going to do, and looking back at our joined up learning bit, is rather than finishing your class and go, okay, go online and do this thing, we want to think about setting up that activity a little bit better. So we'll have a look at how we make it seem more appealing from the class before they go online. So, setting homework. Instead, you're going to say to your students, you're going to do a similar task to the one we did today, but there are a few differences. Go online, do the 4 reading activities for this unit and answer these questions. We'll talk about them at the start of class next time. Okay, and when you say this, you're also going to give them a piece of paper maybe, or send it in an email or on the class blog, however you're doing it, and you give them the 3 questions. The place discussed in the online text is what? The Sahara text is about what theme, but the online text is about what theme? And which place is hotter? Okay, so you're looking at, again, same skills, but in a minor detail. In the chat box, can you tell me what is present in this way of setting homework? What have I included that I didn't include the first time that I asked them to do the homework? I'm basically asking them to do exactly the same thing with a little bit of extra something. What is the additional information that makes it sound more appealing? Okay, there's a reason for doing it. Yep, definitely. Okay, yes, they're going on a quest. And a bit of mystery. Yeah, exactly. Mystery is always good. And a leader and task to be achieved. A little bit of a test. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so just to pick out the things that we've said. So you're going to do a similar task to the one we did today. So I'm linking it directly to the skills they worked on. We're going to work on the same skills, but there are a few differences. Here's the mystery. Go online, do the 4 reading activities. So instead of saying do activities 1 to 4, which is what I'm asking them to do, I'm saying do the 4 reading activities because we did reading today. So it will match up. And answer these questions on the little handout that you give them. And then we'll talk about them at the start of class next time. So we're asking them to do something, to come back, and we'll talk about it when we get back as well. So it's not that I'm sending them off to be free and do what they want online, because if they want to be free and do what they want online, they're going to go on Facebook and they're going to hang out with their friends. They're not going to do any reading activities. So what I want them to do is go away, do what I've asked them, and then come back and tell me about it. So there are a number of ways that I can find out whether they did it. I can check the gradebook, but what I want is for them to go away and do this and come back and do these 3 questions for me the teacher, me the person. They have to come back and tell me. So maybe they also have to tell their partners. It depends on how you set it up, but it's very, very simple. I don't suppose anybody noticed what the place discussed in the online text was. It was quite small and we went past it really quickly. It was Singapore. The Sahara text is about survival and the online text is about environmental maintenance, etc. Which place is hotter? They're both as hot, but one's dry and one's humid. So they're not huge pieces of information that they need to get, but it's something that shows you that they did it and they engaged with the task. So it's almost like a quest for children, but people learn in an emotionally engaged way. We can't, just because people are grown-ups, we can't just assume that they're automatically motivated to do absolutely everything that we say, even if we say it in a really dry way. So in the setup, we're looking at linking it to the task they just did, giving them something additional to do, a wraparound text. So it's a wraparound task, rather. So something that brings it back to you in the class as a person and as their teacher and as part of the journey. And you tell them, we're going to talk about it next time. So it's not something that they're going to go off and do by themselves. And it's specifically linked to what they've been trying to do. So then in the following class, you are going to have to bring it back. Okay, so we've done our setup. You've sent them off. They're doing the work. They're going to be online and doing the independent work, but with support from you, because they know exactly what you want them to do and they know exactly what they need to tell you afterwards. So now we're going to have a quick look at how do you return, how do you bring it back in. So we've done a lot of the work for ourselves already in the form of that wraparound task. So what we need to do is come back into the classroom and we're going to do a little warmer. So regardless of what the rest of the lesson is about, you need to spend 5 minutes reviewing those questions. So what were the answers? So if you give them a task and say, we're going to talk about this next time, and then you don't talk about it next time, they'll go, she never talks about it next time, so I'm not going to bother doing it. So it kind of defeats the purpose. So you need, you need to bring it back and review those questions. Just get the answers, see who found it easier or not. And then maybe ask them a discussion question like, where would you rather live? Would you rather live in the desert or would you rather live in Singapore? So depending on where you are, you'll get different and interesting answers to that. And then you're going to ask them why. So it's not just a yes-no question, but a discussion. Maybe get them to give you the information that's specifically related to the texts themselves. And as you build up this habit of doing that with your students, they will come to expect it and therefore prepare, at least psychologically, for having to do that. There is another aspect to bringing it back, and that comes in the shape of the data that you will find in the LMS to tell you what the students did, how long they took to do it. But I'm going to leave that for now, and I will come back to it in a little bit because Fran is already thinking about what happens next. So I'm going to let her tell you all about that before we talk about data.
Okay, thanks, Deirdre. So Deirdre's talked there a bit about how to use the online workbooks for homework in terms of consolidation of the previous lesson. We're going to look now it's still looking at homework, but it's more looking at looking forward to the next lesson. And so we're talking about preparation as opposed to homework consolidation. Okay, so looking ahead to the next class, the students have done that reading task and they've done some further consolidation of their reading skills online. The next follow-up tasks in the book are, as you can see from the screen here, language development and critical thinking. So the language development sections focus on vocabulary related to graphs, and the critical thinking section looked at how to analyse graphs. So before doing this follow-up section, what we want to do is set the students some work that they can do online in preparation for this class. So at home, we can direct them to this exercise 6 from Unit 6 of the online workbook. Here they'll be doing some vocabulary work based around 2 texts. One of them is about the coldest place on Earth, Antarctica, and the other about the hottest place on Earth, Death Valley, and it will cover some of the language that will come up in that next language section. So students do this at home, and then when you come back to the class, you can show them this graph, which is taken from a later online workbook activity. And you can ask them a nice simple question: which place that they read about online does this graph represent? And so I'm going to ask you now the same question. Does this represent Antarctica or does this represent Death Valley? If you could type that in for me. Okay, we've got a fantastic consensus there. I think that we're going for Antarctica, but it's very clear from that graph that this is a sub-zero temperature region, so it'll be very clear for the students to be able to answer that nice and quickly based on what they've read. Now, once the students see this, you can do a bit of a test-teach-test activity with them. So ask them to write a few sentences about this graph. Before you go on to doing the rest of the work on that language work, I'll just go back 2 screens so you can see that. So before starting this, just ask them to write sentences based around that graph. Now what you'll be able to do once you have their sentences is you'll be able to use that to assess their competency. So you want to be assessing their competency in terms of language, but also in terms of critical thinking. So if the students are needing some additional language work, if you're noticing errors in the sentences that they're writing, then you can go on to that language section and help to use that to help correct some of the errors in their sentences and consolidate that. However, if you're noticing it's not so much the language that's the problem, but it's what they're talking about, then you probably want to focus more on the critical thinking section. So if you take a look at that section there, analyze a graph in the box, you can see that what we're trying to do in this section here is to teach students to look at a graph and see as quickly as possible what is the most interesting information there. What is it that's distinctive about this place? What is the graph showing them? And so you might find that rather than focusing a lot on the language, you might want to do that language section quite quickly, because you've noticed that the issue is not about their English language skills, but it's more about their ability to analyse. And this is where the critical thinking section comes in. I think in most cases students would need a little bit of both, but it would allow you to then adjust your lesson to meet the needs of the students, specifically based on that initial work that they did. Okay, and now I'm going to pass you back to Deirdre to talk a little bit more about the data that the online workbooks provide you with.
Thanks, Fran. So as you see, what Fran was talking about just then was, rather than using the workbook for consolidation, we can also use it for preparation to a certain extent. We don't necessarily want to go too far into that, but there is a little bit of kind of getting the students used to going and finding the information independently and then coming back into the class to do what is most useful for them. So, you know, as Fran said, you can focus on what is most important to them. So either they're looking at the graph and going, it's -2 in January and -3. Well, nobody actually wants to listen to a talk about that, but they might want to listen to somebody telling them their experiences of quite how cold it is. So looking at the more important information, the thing that might be most interesting or useful for people later on. So having that possibility of looking at the individual language and the smaller detail when they're online by themselves gives you the opportunity to look at the bigger picture when you're in class together and take advantage of being together all at the same time to be able to work on those things. So there is quite an important piece missing that we haven't talked about yet, and that is the data. So in any LMS you will have a certain amount of information about what your students have done, when, how well they did it, how long it took them. So I'm not going to go through how you find this or how you use it, because we have videos on YouTube. If you're a Cambridge University Press customer, you can use those videos to interpret the information that you find there, and also find out how to customize what's here. So there's a generic picture, but you can also decide which bits are more important, etc. But for the very kind of basic idea, is what you have to do is just look at the overall spread of grades in your class. So in my class, I've got 11% of my students are getting A's. This isn't so great. And then I've got about half of the class is getting less than a D, which is not fantastic. So there are some things that I'm going to need to work on in general. These are the grades for overall, so not just for what they've just done, but for the course as it's in its entirety. You can also see exactly what the class did for a particular unit. So in this example, we're looking at Unit 6, Weather and Climate Language Development, and in my class, only one student has done the activities, and they got between 20 and 39%. So clearly, maybe in the follow-up lesson, Fran's going to have to focus on the language development rather than the critical thinking part. So the information that you find here helps you to plan your immediate lessons. Now that depends very much on the timing of when you set the deadline of when they have to do things, but you need to take that with a pinch of salt and make it something that is sensible and manageable for you and for your students as well. So the third piece of information that I wanted to show you is that each individual will give you'll be able to see scores for each student in each section, as well as each student in the course overall. You can see, so I assigned you this activity, what did you get? And we've got Unlock student got 33%, not amazing score, and Louise student didn't do it at all. So there are two issues there. One is the first student is motivated enough to do it, but needs some help maybe on the language front, and the second student is going to need some motivational support. So why is that second student not doing it? Is it because I didn't set the task in an exciting enough way, or do I not have the pattern of bringing it back into class afterwards? So motivation is often covered by the weave, if you like, so the setup that we talked about from the first class into the online work, and then from the return, so bringing the online work back into the classroom. It is hugely motivating on an emotional level, an intellectual level, to get them to expect that you're going to do that and to prepare for it. But the data as well can also provide you with a very, very good picture and a very good motivation to get your students to do these things. So the first one is more of a pull. So they want to do it because they can get, they can learn, they can consolidate, they can prepare, they can participate in the following class much better, which is all very well and good and philosophically nice. But there's also the data, which is a bit more of a push, in that you have to do it so that you get a significant or a sufficient score. So when we look at data, we can look at it in terms of assessment, and we can look at it in terms of feedback. So in the same way that we can look at so let's say our students hand in a piece of writing and they get 70% for the piece of writing. We can either use that 70% to inform the final grade, or we can use that 70% to give feedback to the student and say, okay, you did well, but we're going to need to work on these other things. So it gives the student a focus for how to work next, so what to do next. So obviously this is still guided by the teacher, and it's only the teacher that has access to the data for the whole class, which is the case in any LMS. And we can talk about what an LMS is later on. I can see there's a lot of questions in the chat, but a gradebook will provide you with information that covers these things. So looking at the assessment side of things, you can assess whether they did the work online and how well they did the work online. So you can then plan your lesson to make it either focus on the language development or focus on the critical thinking, whatever is appropriate for your students. You also have to take a little bit of a balanced view of that data. So you've got your data, but also you're going to go into the class, bring the online work back into the classroom by asking the questions, by asking them to talk about the graph, doing that kind of thing that will help you make a more personal decision. So data is all very scientific and impersonal. It needs to be balanced out with the personal teacher judgment as well. So there are two tools that work towards the same thing. So you're planning proper lessons. And as I mentioned, assessment can also contribute towards the final grade, which is a bit more summative than formative. The bigger thing in the motivation side of things is the feedback that allows students to feel like you are present when they are working online. And I don't mean teacher presence as in, I don't want you to be stalking them, but I want you to feel like they feel supported by you even when they're working online. They feel supported by you by knowing what they need to do. They feel supported by knowing what they need to do to make the next class go well. They feel supported by you saying to them afterwards, oh wow, I saw everybody got higher than 90% on the homework. That's fantastic. That's really all you need to do with it. So commenting on the data, commenting on their ability to do the activities in class after they've done some work online, all contributes to their sense that you are accompanying them through their online experience, which is the one thing that is missing. So when we talk about, self-study, go do it by yourself, we don't feel supported. They don't feel like they have any assistance or any reason to do it. But when there's teacher presence and teacher support, they feel like it's useful to them, and that them doing it is useful to you and is part of the bigger picture, which is what we're really going for when we talk about teacher presence. Really, really key when you get your students to work online at all. I do a lot of online only courses, and I make sure that I set up any self-study activity in exactly the same way. So you're giving the information beforehand, and when you bring it back into discussion later on, that you always talk about it and never leave it go. So these are huge issues for motivation. And I'm sure there are lots of questions about all of those. So there are lots of different things that we mentioned. Please feel free to throw them at us.
Okay, so first question we've got is from Tamara Osman, and it's a common question about blended learning, which is, what do I do if some of the students haven't done the homework?
Okay, so there are a couple of things. So as you noticed in the in the first kind of round where we were looking at the reading task and the wraparound task, when you're reviewing those questions and you're asking them a discussion question about which place you'd rather live in, you need to keep that to 5 minutes. So what you're trying to do is check that they have done it, and not just done it in a kind of half asleep clicking all the buttons way, but that they have engaged with the topic. But you need to keep that to about 5 minutes, so that if most of the students haven't done it, then your lesson doesn't go out the window. So there is that. So if it's only consolidation work, you don't depend quite so heavily on it for your subsequent class. If you're doing the preparation work, you do depend on it a little bit more heavily. So what you need to do is, in the following class, is create a lesson and create activities in that lesson that the students can do better if they've done the work online, and that they can do kind of, sort of, probably badly if they haven't done the work online, but they can still do the task. So if you're talking about, doing some sort of activity about, my standard example, giving directions. If they've done the language work online before class, they will do the activity really well, and you can see that they're confident and they get creative with the language, etc. If they haven't done it, then they'll kind of be able to do it, but the language they produce won't be very good. So you'll be able to assess how well they do it rather than whether they can do it or not. So the idea is to make sure that the activities you do in the subsequent class are possible, but to different levels of ability, and make sure that you communicate with your students that you are assessing how well they do that, rather than whether they can do it or not. So if it's on a scale, then they can all still participate. You can get some interesting information about whether they did it and whether they learned from doing it, without having to sacrifice your actual class.
Okay, thanks. Pardon me. We had some questions around the learning management systems. I wonder if one of you would be able to sort of just explain a little about how the learning management system works, how it gathers the data about student performance, etc.
Okay, so LMS stands for Learning Management System, and we have one of our own, and a lot of publishers have them. A lot of different Moodle is a learning management system, for example, and it's essentially a school, if you like, online. It is a space where we can put our content, and you can put your students, and you can track what your students do and how well they do it. So it's essentially the place where you keep all the things that they need to look at, and you manage the groups of students and you manage individuals. So in terms of what's the big thing for teachers is the gradebook. So for example, if the students do the activity that Fran asked them to do, which is one activity with five items in it, and they do those 5 items. If they get them all correct, the gradebook will say that they got 100%. If they got one of them, the gradebook will say 20%. I hope you're noticing my excellent mathematical skills there as well. And they will, if they get 20% the first time, it will say attempt 1, 20%, attempt 2, 100%. So it tracks the number of times they do things, it tracks the scores they got each time, it also tracks the amount of time it took them to do the activities. So it's quite complete in terms of the kinds of behavior and activity that it tracks. And then that is true for all of throughout the course. And you can, as I mentioned, you can customize our gradebook, so you can make some activities obligatory and you can make some activities optional, so not everyone has to do everything, which is a really good idea if you have a class where you have some students who are really strong, some students who need some extra practice, so you can keep back some activities as optional for those people to do. So there are a lot of different ways of using it, but essentially it is a place where you keep content, you put people, and you track what those people do with that content, essentially.
Thanks very much. Question now from Camelia Giorgita, who asks, how can you do this when you've got a structure for your lessons with 4 weeks in class, then a 10-week online period, then 4 weeks in class again? So a very sort of divided learning period?
Okay, so in those 10 weeks, you might have some punctuation of a live session as well. But what you can do is in those 4 weeks, you can set up what the practice is going to be. So in the same way as you finish your face-to-face classes, you're going to tell them, okay, this is what you want to do to practice these particular activities. This kind of consolidation is going to match this. If you have 10 weeks when they don't see you at all, it's more of an online only course than a blended course. So it's a little bit separate. So what you would probably want to do is make a schedule and map out the activities that you want them to do, but also map where the activities online match with what they did in the 4 weeks when they spent time with you face to face, so that you've got some sort of reason for them to do it, so that they have a memory of a physical experience that they had in the same room with everyone, and do that together, so that there is a pattern that they follow. And then when they come back, do some sort of overarching review. So never ever ever repeat exactly what you've done online, because it totally negates the asking them to do it in the first place. But you do need to bring the idea back into the classroom. So when you come to your 4 weeks at the end, then refer to the ideas, ask them to do some sort of reflection that you can discuss with them when they come back in. So it's a much more kind of it's more of a macro level than individual items. So maybe you could ask them to either come back with their questions, problems that they've had, and ask the students to teach each other about, okay, well, I did really well on that one and you struggled, so let me help you, etc. So there are various ways of doing that, but the general principle of set it up and return is still quite valid in that context.
Thanks. Got a question now from Bridget Vida, who wonders whether blended learning is really sort of a division between working from the book in class, working online at home, and whether there's any scope for actually sort of mixing that up a bit more and doing some more digital work, for instance, in the classroom.
There's definitely
room for that. I mean, some of the options that you have are, if you have a smart board, you can use the online workbook in class. So you can do some of the activities as whole class activities. I mean, it's not the purpose that it was designed for, but it can be used as that. You can do all sorts of any of the activities that you would normally bring in, because if you're teaching from the book, the books are well designed and well constructed, but students get really bored using the same object in the class every time. So you always want to kind of mix it up and do something, maybe do a reading online, do it maybe the other way around. And that if you have the right equipment, you can definitely do that. But yeah, that's
It might also say there that there are ebooks available of the online of the unlocked books. So if you did have a completely digital classroom, you may actually be wanting to use the core course content digitally as well as the online workbooks.
Okay, thanks. A question now from Michael Whitcomb, who asks what research has been done into the measurable effectiveness of blended learning. Deirdre, is that one for you?
We've done a fair amount of research into measurable effectiveness, but not on this particular title. We have another title called Touchstone, which we have done quite a lot of research into, and I don't have the statistics to hand, but we have studies where we looked at a particular group of institutions before they adopted the blended program and after they adopted the blended program, and I have no memory of what the numbers are, but the graph went steeply upwards. So there was a definite benefit to that particular group of students when they started using the blended program. And another one, there's an institution in Moscow who they were a technical university, and once they started using this blended program, their students' IELTS results went as high as band 7, which is really very unusual in kind of technical universities. So Sorry, I don't have the numbers, but those are, it is provable, I think, at least in some areas.
Okay, thanks. Another question now from Christine Sotro-Chandley, who asks whether there's extra practice or extended work, for instance, for differentiation. That one for you, Fran. Okay, I'll just... Okay.
Okay, Christine, there isn't, at this moment, there isn't, but in August of this year, we will be bringing out some A1 differentiating activities.
And depending on the successes of those and the efficacy of those, then there's a possibility that additional ones would be done.
And just to add to that as well, I mean, when we mentioned with the gradebook that you can make some activities optional, that is effectively, it's not done for you, but you as a teacher can go and review what's in the online workbook and decide what your class are going to do obligatorily and keep those other activities back to give, so keep the other ones optional, not give them to everyone, but if you spot that there's someone in your class that does need any extra support, then you can give them those activities to do. So it will not affect their overall grade, but it will give them the extra practice and support that they require at the time.
I'm not quite sure I fully understand the question, Anderson. Would you be able to clarify?
Okay, so Anderson, could you possibly let us know in the chat a little more detail on what you mean there? And we'll go to another question. We'll come back to you. I have a question also from Natalia Yordanova, who asked whether the e-content of Unlock can be uploaded into Moodle.
I'm afraid not. All Cambridge content is in the Cambridge LMS or on another LMS that we use. So basically, if you buy the book or the ebook and you get the code, an access code to get access to the online content, then you will be working within the Cambridge LMS. So it wouldn't. We don't give away the content to put in other LMSs, but you do get free access to our LMS when you buy the product itself.
Okay, thanks. Question now from Ihor Shevtsov, who asks whether you saw any, in the research you've done, whether you saw any disadvantages to this system, anything that needs to be improved or worked on. Is that one for you, Deirdre?
Yeah.
There are various things that came up in terms of how teachers motivate students, hence our discussion today, and various things that kind of came up within the product that we were talking about that then got fixed, so that all of that information goes back into editorial, who are the people in charge of making the books and making the online products as well. So one of the things that would come up are things like, how do you get the students to use forums and blogs and things, and now we provide some support for that title for teachers trying to manage those activities online. So there are things like that. Disadvantages are more about class management than about the product itself. So the product is really, it's content and it's good quality content, but what is difficult for teachers and for institutions is integrating it into their general program, their general curriculum, and training the learners to be independent, but not training them to go off on their own and do their own thing, and bringing everything back so that it makes sense within what the school, what the teacher, and what the students are trying to achieve overall. So it's more of a kind of a program design issue than anything else. And we have worked with several institutions to help them design programs that make sense for them, for their students, for what they're trying to achieve using the content that we've built.
Okay, thanks. A question now from Jonathan Lewington, who asks whether you have any tips for school administrators on motivating teachers to integrate online courses with classes. Which one of you fancies answering that one? Looks like Fran has gestured that Deirdre's going to answer this one. There you go.
Okay, so that forms part of a consultancy service that we provide for bigger institutions. But in general, what I would suggest is that you make sure that you've got a decent training program that helps teachers overcome their fear of using technology and using technology in front of their students as well. So even though you're asking them to ask their students to work online, they still need to know how to get there, how to do that themselves. Because if the students ask them a question, nobody wants to look silly in front of their students. So having something that shows them through the click by click, go here, this will do this, click this will do that, work through that, and then show them that when they're working online, those things mirror what they're trying to achieve in the classroom, and try and work with them to create a program that works through the material, much like Fran and myself have done today. So we looked at a sample lesson, we looked at what's online that backs up that lesson, and we looked at how to bring that back into class. So all of those are teaching skills. It's assessing materials, it's planning lessons, it's observing your students and making decisions accordingly. So making sure that you ground the fact that we're working online and we're using technical tools, but we're still using those things to deploy our very strong teaching skills. And if you work with them in the beginning and help them work through that initial kind of program design, see the value of it, understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, will really, really help people understand that it's not a big scary separate thing, and it's something that they feel they can have some sort of control over as well. It's not like their program is going to be designed or dictated by some external technology that they don't understand or have any oversight on. So working through that process at the very beginning is really important, and just helping them feel like, okay, so I know how to do this, I know my way around it, I can deploy this to best advantage for my students, and that is well within my capability, and that it is my responsibility to do that as well. I think that can be a very, very powerful motivator. I think classifying ourselves as non-natives is it can make things a little bit scarier than it needs to be. So as I mentioned before, going through that process of training people and showing how it fits into what is already an existing way of working and an existing set of relationships can help take that away. So to show that, nativity, being a native or not being a native, is not the be-all and end-all of how you interact with your students, whether you use technology or not. So that will be one thing that I would definitely say. So try and feel more comfortable and help your colleagues to feel more comfortable to move past that. It's just an initial thing, and it can be overcome.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Don't forget that we've got another webinar this afternoon at 3 o'clock, so 4 hours from now, when Herbert Puchter will be talking about teaching adult learners. And in a week's time, again at 3 o'clock UK time, we've got an introduction to the Cambridge English corpus, which should be very interesting, with Professor Claire Denbury. So Lucia has put links into the chat so you can find out how to sign up for those webinars. So thanks very much, everybody. Thanks particularly to Fran and Deirdre for today's session. And just to let you know, it'd be really helpful to us if you could answer a survey. We're just going to put that into the chat. In fact, Lucia already has, and I've put exactly the same link into the chat, so you've got no excuses for not filling that out. So thanks very much for joining us. Hope to see as many of you as possible in 4 hours' time. Thanks particularly to Deirdre and Fran, and see you all again very soon. Thanks very much.